Hi, I'm Dr. Katharine with Alula and our Fireside Chat. Very, very excited today to be chatting to Amanda.stocker. She is amazing. She's helped me and my family massively. 35 years of experience, so really highly, highly experienced, but also highly compassionate. So I will let you give a bit of an intro just so people know who you are and what you do.
Hello. Well, thank you for having me. I live in London and I have been working in this field, well, forever, really. I trained as a teacher when I was in my 20s, and I always had a passion for um, helping children who really weren't managing in one way or another.
Mm.
I definitely have dyslexia. I've struggled all through my school days. And so that's always been a passion for mine, trying to help um, teachers support children, children to support themselves, parents to support the children, to be able to do the very best that they can do. And their skills are enormous, but schools aren't always set up to accommodate those skills and make their lives simple or
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, that's it's definitely something obviously I come across when I'm working with kids in therapy as well. Is just in school and academics play such a huge part of existence for a very long time. So it's a big factor that we really need to just think about, in terms of just support and supporting parents as well, because obviously, sometimes we just don't really know what to do. We know there's a difficulty, but we don't really know what it is. And if you're not an educator yourself or a mental health professional yourself, it's very tough to know, just where to start. Um, and obviously, we're doing this series this week at Alula that is really helping parents to think about supporting their children with exam prep. And I know obviously different people in different countries, and so exams for some people, are already passed. But I always think sometimes the retrospective is useful. So in that sense of even if your exams are done with, you might be thinking about, look, how do I approach it differently next year, given how much stress and worry has sort of generated. And if your children are still going through, their exams, then we're thinking about, what can we be doing? So maybe a little bit of general kind of discussion about exams and some of the pressure we know it brings. But then I really want to kind of tap into that expertise you've got around supporting neurodiverse, children, because it's, we say what, 1 in 5 children, um, you know, will have a learning need of some kind, and particularly obviously that statistic applies to dyslexia, but it's huge and it shows up everywhere.
and exams are really important. And this is the really important thing that it's very difficult. The children know how important the exams are. The children are being warned about the exams coming up, whether they're just end of term exams, end of year exams, or big exams like 11 plus or SATs or GCSEs or A levels or uni exams. And so they all know they're coming. And the conversations start very early, and the pressure is enormous because the students know that sitting an exam is one of the most difficult things for them. Neurodiverse children, I mean, some students I've worked with absolutely love that pressure of the exams and that they sit down and then it's over with in a set period of time, but they're quite far and few between.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that's the thing, I think there's definitely that sense of, and I will see it, let's say, in the work that I do with children, like at the start of the year, there's obviously the transition to the start of the year. And then we've got this period where they're really sort of involved in the work. But there's this level of stress and worry that I notice starts to bed in. And often if I check in to see, what's happening at school, they'll mention that, teachers are talking repeatedly about exams, exams, exams. And it really starts to build this anticipation of something big is coming. And I understand that it's maybe there because people want to sharpen the mind and get kids to focus and think about what's ahead. But there's always a part of me that thinks, do we really need to make it such a big deal? Like, yes, you've got to take an assessment and we want to see what you understand and what you don't and what needs working on. But it's always done in this sort of way that feels like it's the end of the world if, it doesn't go well. And yeah, I'm always sort of conscious of, is there maybe a different way to frame exams?
It's really interesting. The one of my top tips for studying for exams for any of the children I've ever worked with, which is a lot of children, is to start early. So that's counteracting sort of what we're saying. Um, I cannot think. I really don't think there's and not. I don't think there's any student I've worked with who works well with cramming. There
No.
are students who work well with cramming. We knew them at school, and that worked really well for them. But
Yeah.
not the children I work with or adults I work with. Um, but I think they every country in the world has a different exam routine. And of course, there's all the different levels. There, they are, there is so much discussion around trying to change exams. And there are steps like the IB, which is, I think, 100 years old now or something. Um, which actually I did as well as GCSEs. I loved IB, and oddly enough, I say to my students now who do IB, I just love IB. And they go, oh, it's quite long essays you have to do, but
Yeah.
it's. I think it works really well. It's more diverse. You're not just down. That's particularly for the GCSE. Well, it is for GCSE age groups. So it's not you're not down to three. You're doing more subjects.
Broader. Yeah.
But I think that the pressure is on for, if you talk about 11 plus, you won't get into those schools. I met someone this week, 8 plus. I mean, I haven't talked to anybody, a boy or a parent with a son doing 8 plus for many, many years, but this mother is talking about 8 plus. Like, oh, really? Okay.
Wow.
Um, you know, um, I've just one student finishing he's finished his 13 plus. I mean, that's big because he really had major school he wanted to go to. So you have to prepare. And then also there's not just preparing that the knowledge is in your mind and you can regurgitate it, but also preparing um, how to you work the exam, how to actually answer the questions in the way they want them answered.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
Americans answer exam questions very differently from British people. French are very different again. It's
Yeah. It's very different. I mean, I think that's something that, in terms of, let's say, just the general concept of study skills. And I think we don't necessarily always think about that. Like if we take a step back from the exams, and like you're saying, it's prepping early, isn't it? It's getting in the skill set that means that come the exam, you're able to take it and you're able to sort of not just manage, let's say, the stress and anxiety that comes with it, but you're able to know what to do to be as successful through that questioning as possible. So I guess if we're thinking about, like you said, the prepping early, and maybe if we kind of zone in a little bit more here around, neurodiversity, dyslexia, and other sort of specific learning difficulties, what would you say, like in your experience, comes up as a repeated need in terms of helping students get you smile? It sounds like a very big, broad question, but what are maybe some of the things there that you would say, look, these are things that parents just need to start getting in early with, even before we approach exam season?
well, what I say to all of my students is that all of us learn in a different way,
Okay.
and there is not one way that is right. but they need to, from as early as possible, and this is a big thing I work on, is learning how to take responsibility for their strengths, which are innumerable, and their weaknesses, which can overpower their strengths quite easily. So it's really taking that idea that we all learn in a different way. The other thing I always explain repeatedly to my students is that we have five senses. And if we take something in with one sense, so we're just reading our notes, it's not going to stick. So then
Right.
if you put a fiddle in your hand, a pen, anything, and then you're touching and you're reading, well, that's two senses. And then if you can like hum, weirdly enough, that works for a lot of my students, then they're using your ears. And you know, the more senses you can, so drawing, making notes, doing mind maps, um, uh, doing little drawings around something. So if you're studying geography or history, doing little sketches, you don't want it really beautiful because that takes way too long, but just little sketches to go around it. And then your mind will remember the hand movement of the sketch. And so it's thinking about the five senses,
Right.
taking breaks and using breaks as a bonus, as a treat. So
Right.
I'm going to do this and then I will, have a break. And that break will be, whatever it is they want to do. Um, and I think I've noticed more and more is particularly if you have a lot of kids and, you need to get somebody to ballet or I don't know what, is just checking in on them.
Mm.
Just walking in, not saying, "How are you still studying? Oh, you don't look like nothing like that." Just, just how's it going? Can I bring you a glass of water? Would you like a banana? Checking in.
Right. Right.
Being
Just sort
present.
of, yeah. It's interesting. You're talking about breaks because last night I was talking to one of my young people that I work with, and we were a lot of experience of overwhelm around just constant studying, right? They're trying to do exceptionally well and they're working all the time. As I was saying, have you tried the Pomodoro technique where you do 25 minutes, 5 minutes off? And their point was when I take a break, it's hard for me to come back.
Yeah.
Um, and I wonder if maybe if we have students that have more of those kind of like attentional difficulties and the drift and the zoning out, and how would we help them to come back after the break? Because or the
Yeah.
tendency could be to I'll just sit and just keep working, but we know that ultimately that's not the most productive.
Well, I think that goes back to being aware that we have, that we all do things differently. And for
Okay.
the child to, or the student to be aware that that is a difficulty to get back, to get their head back into the work. One of the things I suggested recently was this was for GCSE, and there's so many subjects for GCSE, and it's really overwhelming, is to set up different stations around the house.
Okay.
So you'll do geography in the kitchen, and they'll do the, whatever it is in the dining room, or where, what, how it depends how your house works.
Mm.
Uh, Obviously, if there's other kids, then you can't just leave things out. So one, my student, she had different bags, and then she would go, okay, so now I'm going to do biology, get up and then move to another room, her mom's room, or
Right. Yeah.
do it there, and that is enough of a break. But again, yes, you have to be aware and say, okay, but I need to really refocus, bring myself in, and they need to have tools to do that.
I mean that's really interesting. There's something there about that concrete shift. Like I'm physically shifting. My brain is kind of then shifting along with me, and we're going into something else, which is interesting and obviously is not something that I ever thought to suggest. And I love the idea about, just checking in because, conversation I was having with a parent the other day, and they were saying, look, I seem to care more about them studying than they do about themselves studying. And I think, again, there can be that pressure as a parent, like if you know that your child is meant to be studying and you're expecting to walk in and see something that to you looks like they are concentrated and they're working, and you don't see that. I wonder if it can be easy to miss the let me just check in to see that you're okay. Let's put the work aside for a second and let me just focus in on you as a human being. Like, are you doing okay? So I love that idea of just checking in and seeing how they're doing, because I guess it's I don't know, we put up something recently that's saying connection, connection first, and that really kind of reminds us about that. But I guess in terms of, let's say, do you think that the stresses that somebody who's sort of more neurodiverse or has specific learning needs, do you think they experience a different level or type of stress around exams? Or would you say it, again, maybe just very varied?
Yes, definitely, because failure is another level of stress. And
Mm,
if these neurodiverse children, if they're doing really channeled exams and their expectations are very high, the demands by the family are high, their own expectations about how well they want to do and where they want to go, because these kids all know they can do it.
yeah,
They know they can do it. I mean, it's not rocket science. They understand the subjects. It's just getting it down on paper in the time slot. And we haven't talked about that. Extra time is really important. But yeah, yeah, stomach aches. Your brain just absolutely wiring out that it's not going to take in any more information whatsoever. Doesn't matter how many times I look at this. Not
mm,
knowing how to move forward. Okay, I know I have to study, but what should I study next? One of the things I do a lot is either in a mind map or in a traditional timetable, easy to get online. You could do lots of colors and all that sort of thing. And timetabling all your subjects. So have your subjects written down. Okay, biology. I'm going to whack in biology here and whack it in here and whack it in here. And, English, language, or even just breaking it down to the books you have to do for GCSEs or A levels or whatever. And then, put in your fun things, watch TV, go for a walk, go play baseball, go play football, whatever it is they want to do. And then when their mind is zoning out, then I say, just look at your timetable and
okay.
think, okay, what should I be doing? Oh man, okay, well, I didn't do any of those ones back there. So I said, just forget about that. Move on to the next one. What's the next one? Okay, all right, I'll do that. Just having those, this sort of
Like a
support system.
structure. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Like, how important is the structure for kids who are, or children, teens who are neurodiverse, like this need to sort of structure stuff in, like how crucial would you say that actually is?
I'd love to throw that question back to you. But it's a really interesting one. It's something we
Yeah,
don't really have the answer for, do we?
yeah,
I think that, again, every single child is different, every adult's different. I think that it depends which exams you're doing. So if you're, again, in my mind, A levels are very, very difficult. GCSEs are far more difficult for neurodiverse because it's just the scale of the work.
yeah,
There's just
yeah,
so much. And
yeah,
so for something like GCSEs or uni students, when they have a lot of work to do and a lot of timetables for when work has to be finished, with writing up reports and things, um,
yeah,
I think that you have to structure it. Otherwise, you're just going to,
yeah,
go to the pub and stay there too long, or play football or go on your phone and do your TikToky thingies and
Yeah, yeah, no, no, I think, obviously, like you said, coming back to that place of, from a neuroscience point of view, or definitely the structure makes sense, because then your brain sort of, in terms of like an activation, it knows what it's doing, it knows where it's supposed to be in time and place, and without that structure, I think we all need a level of structure. But I think, let's say, in my own experience, knowing just how important it is, and actually in quite a granular detail as well, I find tends to be useful. So it's like, yes, I'm doing biology, but today I'm doing this section, I'm doing this chapter, and that seems to sort of cut down some of the clamor, some of the noise of, like you said, if I'm splitting attention here, there, and everywhere, and it's like, I've got to do this, and then I've got to write an essay, and I've got to do, it's
biology,
overwhelming.
biology, exactly. What really? And but I have to say also, it's really difficult for a lot of my students to break down a subject
Yeah.
to the smaller level. So I remember one of my GCSE students, and it's not even difficult. He actually found it impossible. So what we did, and Spanish, we did it for physics, we did it for Spanish, did it for quite a few subjects, and we just went through his book, and then
Mm.
his textbook, and
Yeah.
just did chapter, 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 and then we did one mind map for like physics, and then each of the prongs coming out was a different one, and then from that he did three or four different ones of what he needed to do for each topic, and that did help him. I mean,
Yeah.
he
Yeah.
really does now. So
And I mean, I think that's something where, parents often think, what can I do to help? But maybe that is something, that the helping to sort of make sense of this noise, like helping to sort of make it feel more manageable. Like, okay, we've got a system, we've got, some steps into it. And it's that support to, bring order to something, and zoom out and then zoom back in, which I guess, a lot of the sort of children and teens we're talking about, the organizational part is, the executive functioning is the part that, often is a struggle, right? It's like getting these things to sequence neatly into some kind of order, where you can see lots of ideas and lots of, patterns and things, but it's like bringing it back into these sort of very sort of refined sections and subjects is maybe less of a, and not like I would say a natural thing, but it just takes work, and it takes practice, and it takes kind of skill building. Um, and I guess the point, to go back to this idea of, are there particular stresses that maybe we might notice coming up? This fear of, I can't do it. And I wonder if that shows up more commonly with, children who are neurodiverse in an educational setting. Is that something you kind of notice, maybe because I guess you blend and you teach children with all different profiles? Is that something that can really add to the stress?
Katharine, it's enormous, and a lot. This is sort of a bit lateral thinking, but a lot of the students, if you go into reception and there's these kids sitting there, and then you have like Annabelle, and she's writing Annabelle beautifully. And then you have Tom, and he's going, oh man, I don't even know how to hold a pencil, or, scrunches up the
Mm.
paper. So failure starts so, 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 so early. They see it. And
Yeah.
this is something this is, 40 years I've worked on this. Um, and it's not to work on it like to hide it from anyone else. My biggest passion really is allowing adults to have their children assessed earlier. I know it's starting very, very slowly in Colorado. They just passed this new law that they can extend assessing from 4-year-olds. In Britain, they're saying, you know, eight. It's like, so yes, when you go to exams, there is already failure. So we said that quite early on, is that they know that exams themselves are already one of the harder things for them to do. If they had were in class and they were studying rivers and they had to do a lot of, you know, drawing and understand how the rivers all work, that's they love that.
Yeah.
If they,
Yeah.
you know, most of them, they stand up and they could say things. Some don't like standing up, but you know, but sitting in a timed, in a small space where they can't move, and in a timed environment where it's all really quiet and you can't look up and there's just this noise, and it's a nightmare for them. It's really, really difficult. And getting extra time is absolutely, in my mind, absolutely vital. But it's also almost a killer in A levels, because some of my students have done, for one paper, almost 4 hours with their extra time.
Wow.
So that, and then I remember one of them, wonderful student, she then had half an hour and then into her next one, because they've had an hour
Yeah.
and a.
Yeah.
So, but extra time is really vital. And the other thing is, they all have to practice the extra time. The children have to understand what that means. They have to feel what it means. What is this extra time? How does that feel? And then, which they're doing more, which they didn't used to do, they're seriously doing more now, is they put the children with extra time in different rooms, because then
Yes.
they don't
Yeah.
have everybody else stopping. And
Yeah. Yeah.
but so yes, you know, then you only get extra time from assessing. So it's a
Yeah.
difficult, it's a whole thing, and it's expensive to assess your children, and it's off-putting. My son said to me, he said, most of my life, you know, I'm okay. I'm pretty smart. I can deal with everything. The worst thing is when you ever sent me to be assessed, and they made me feel so stupid. It's because they find the points where they're
Yeah.
where they're
Yeah. They're struggling.
struggling and pull them out.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, you know, I think it's really this holistic picture, isn't it? It's like, first of all, sort of noticing that something is showing up for your child, and then sort of going, okay, what could it be? And I think, you know, parents are often worried about going down the route of a formal assessment. People are worried about labels, labeling your child and how they'll be
Understandably.
perceived, and yeah, you know, how the child themselves will um identify, right? And so there's this whole concern in the first place. And then I think there's a sense of, well, who do I even go to? Where do I start? What is it I'm actually looking for? You know, and then school may or may not be quite switched on to the idea of, you know, learning difficulties and differences and what they can do and what they can support with. So it's actually this quite big systemic sort of issue. And then even if you do go down the route of assessment, it's again, how do people interpret the outcomes and how do they translate into the classroom? And then, like you said, even into the exam room. So it's sort of, you might have great support during the year, and come exam, somehow we forget that it's not just the mindset of the person taking the exam, it's also the environment. So, you know, there's nothing more discouraging than you're still partway through your paper and people are scraping their chairs back and getting up and asking for more paper. And I mean, there is nothing more off-putting than just something as basic as what happens in an exam room. And like you say, the kind of the noises and the fact that we're meant to sit really silently and we can't move, we can't look around. And so it's really just thinking about actually how, if we're thinking about what creates stress, there is, you know, yes, the sort of the challenges of having to always adapt to a way of teaching and you know, assessing that maybe doesn't flow naturally with how, you know, people who are neurodiverse work naturally, but also then you zoom that in even more into this situation that happens every so often, and it has to happen because you can't get away from it because of how things are structured. And I think if we look at it that way, we can see that this is actually potentially a really sort of stress inducing experience.